Special thanks to Wade Tyler for commissioning today's review, alongside Batman Returns and the Batman 89 comics, which I will very much get to. For now, let's talk about Tim Burton's Batman. Released in 1989, and perhaps one of the most famous superhero movies of all time, just like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. In fact, I think the two films have this sort of contrast with each other. For example, they share the same composer, Danny Elfman. They both look like comic books, yet are clearly movies at the same time. And they both have a main villain that heavily reflects the hero, but we'll get to that. As you all know, I like to give a ton of context on how this film became a thing, so let's start from the very beginning. Batman was first conceptualized by Robert Kane, who later asked for input from Milton Finger, although you probably know them better by their pen names Bob Kane and Bill Finger. The story of Batman's creation is an interesting story in its own right. Bob Kane has posthumously received a lot of backlash for insisting for years that he was the sole creator of Batman, when it was really a group effort. From what I understand, Bob Kane was mostly the drawer, and Bill Finger was mostly the writer. Some might say that Batman was stolen in a sense, because Bill Finger wasn't properly given credit for decades. Okay, that's not entirely true. He did get credit as a writer for the villains in a Batman 66 special, but that was about it. In the movie we're about to talk about, Bob Kane was the sole creator of Batman according to DC. I do want to note that apparently Bill was not resentful, despite getting minimal credit, and Bob getting most of the money from Batman. In fact, he died a nobody, because he died in the 1970s from failing health before he had reached the age of 60. Bob Kane though? Oh boy. He lived in luxury and died at the ripe old age of 83. So we can all agree that Bill Finger deserved better as the co-creator of one of the most influential superheroes to ever exist. But with that tragic origin story that might rival the actual written origin story, Batman became a huge hit. The different approach compared to Superman was pretty substantial, making Batman a dark, menacing figure who shows no mercy and kills the criminals who cross him in the city. But then from what I hear, laws of the time were implemented that forced comic book writers to tone down the dark, gritty Batman. And that's why we've got Batman 66. That's not a knock against the 1966 show, it's definitely iconic in its own right, but the thing is, that wasn't the character's roots. From what I understand, it wasn't until the late 1960s, after the show was done, that comic book writers Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams decided to take the character back to his dark roots. And it became the Batman we recognize today with Frank Miller's Batman: The Dark Knight Returns, that is highly regarded as the source of modern Batman. If you want to know why Batman cracks no jokes, viciously gives criminals a beating, and Gotham City being the most unsafe place to live, that's why. I guess it's worth noting that this all didn't just happen in one day. This was an evolution of the character over the course of decades. I'm actually curious on what people will come up with once The Dark Knight becomes public domain in the 2030s, which is around a decade from now. We're eagerly awaiting that day, because then anyone can make their own version of Batman. Apparently, there were a shitload of bootleg Batman movies in the 1960s from across the world. I should also note that Batman 89 isn't even the first theatrical Batman movie. That was the movie tied to the first season of Batman 66. But fuck it, we're talking about Batman 89 first. The first theatrical Batman movie will come later. And yes, before anyone asks, Mask of the Phantasm will be on my list since that is a theatrically released Batman movie. I'm skipping over the shit that's straight to DVD. Theatrical or nothing. If it wasn't released in the theaters, I'm not reviewing it, unless someone commissions me to, but that's a different story. So anyways, Batman 89 was directed by Tim Burton, the biggest filmmaker when it comes to modern gothic and morbid films. He directed the 2005 Charlie and the Chocolate Factory film, the one with numerous cannibalism jokes, and riveted heavily on the conspiracy of the 1971 film to the point of self-awareness. And hey, it was more faithful to Roald Dahl's book. I've heard that Dahl's widow stated that she's certain that Dahl would have loved the 2005 film, because if you didn't know, he hated the 1971 film for its deviations from the book. What does this have to do with Batman? Not much, but but I think I'd mention it, since I wanted to talk about that at some point. Apparently Burton had trouble reading comic books when making Batman 89, so it's surprising that he didn't absolutely butcher the source material. It's worth noting that this film does have plenty of changes from the source material, and the film actually adds and invents things for the movie. There are characters who didn't appear in the comics prior to that point, and they came up with their own story with the main antagonist. More on him later. For the role of Batman, Michael Keaton was cast as the iconic superhero. While memorable and liked today, so many Batman fans ripped on Michael Keaton's casting back then before the film came out. Keaton worked with Burton on the film Beetlejuice and was mostly known for comedies. Plus, he isn't exactly the most physically appealing vigilante in the world. To be honest, with no hindsight, I probably would have agreed with everyone who had qualms with Michael Keaton, but hey, Michael Keaton played the role well, and was certainly the biggest surprise of a performance ever. Quick side note here, I always confuse Michael Keaton with Ed Harris for some reason. They kinda look somewhat similar in a lot of their roles as older men, plus the fact that they played the same character once back to back. In Call of Duty Black Ops, Hudson was voiced by Ed Harris, and then in Black Ops 2, he was replaced by Michael Keaton.
I am not shitting you.
So when it came to movies like The Truman Show and The Founder, I confused the two on end. But speaking of Keaton, when it comes to this film series, when Joel Schumacher, or however the hell you say his name, took over the series, Michael Keaton was offered a fat paycheck to return as Batman for the second time. But he declined as he apparently wished to stay loyal to Burton when he refused to tone down the dark, gritty nature. And you know, I can respect him for that. And hey, that decision was actually wise in the end, because Batman Forever and Batman and Robin ended up not being that good. I haven't seen Batman Forever before, and I can't remember what Batman and Robin was like since I didn't see that in fucking years, but that'll be an interesting discussion. Anyways, with all that being said, that's all the backstory I wanted to give for the film. Let's get into the actual thing. So just like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, the film opens up with Danny Elfman's score, and it's iconic in its own right. I first heard the theme in Lego Batman back when I played it on the Nintendo DS and Wii. At the time, I just thought whoever did the music must have given it their all for a Lego game. But nope, it was ripped from the game's main inspiration, Batman 89. The Lego game used a lot of tracks from Batman 89 as a matter of fact. To describe the main theme, it fits Batman 2 well. It has this aura of a hero rising up to protect people. I don't know how to describe it. It also perfectly fits the gothic style, and it's perfectly suitable music, as well as it being a real banger. If I had to describe the theme in one word, it would be badass. I mean, compare it to the oh-so-iconic theme from Batman 66. There's no competition. Batman 66's theme was iconic for how cheesy it was, but Batman 89 took a fresh new approach since the 60s Batman. I remember someone else said it best. Moving from the Batman show to the movie was a good way to keep people interested. You gotta try something new eventually, and it's a lesson film companies don't understand today. So yeah, this movie's tone is dark and mature, and I like how similar it is to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, where it's all a musical score to get you excited for the movie, before you've even seen the story in play. Honestly, with all the craze of cinematic universes, I wish there were more superhero movies like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Tim Burton's Batman, where they all have that standalone appeal, where the universe revolves around one character instead of many. While mainstream audiences can't think of, say, Iron Man and Captain America without thinking of the MCU, I am eager for there to be a version of these characters on the big screen that derives solely to the standalone source material, and is based on that and nothing else. Like, have you ever wondered what a standalone trilogy that focuses exclusively on those two heroes would be like? And we get more traditional supervillains like Crimson Dynamo? Who's Crimson Dynamo, the filthy casual says? Exactly. I guess Captain America, just like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and many other characters, will become public domain in around 10 years. I'll believe we'll have to wait another 30 years after that before Spider-Man and Iron Man and a lot more classic Marvel heroes become public domain. The younger side of us can probably wait, but for the older side, you'll probably be damn old or dead by the time that happens. Anyways, enough with the public domain talk. Let's get on with the film. So the film's first official scene after the main theme is to introduce us to this take on Batman. And it's pretty cool to see his day-to-day routine. It's later referenced that this is Batman in his earlier stages due to more limited sightings. I wasn't sure where the film was going at first after the main title, but it's effective at setting up the movies once you piece together that this is Batman's complete introduction scene. The scenery for Gotham is quite excellent. It's a testament for Tim Burton's love for the Gothic art style. I read on Wikipedia that the city is meant to look down on the citizens in a sort of subservient sort of way. It's derivative off of famous German expressionist silent films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Metropolis, both of which have inspired many other films after them. Batman does have a different feel than those really old movies, since this is a film with sound, the standard since the 1930s. But it's visually impressive nonetheless. So we briefly follow a normal family being mugged by two crooks in the crime-ridden city. After a successful robbery, the two thieves hang out on a rooftop, counting the money from their small-time score. Amidst all this, you can see Batman making his dramatic entrance. He's seen through the shadows, and you really have to lean in to see him. It's actually very horror movie-esque how it's done, even though we have nothing to fear from Batman, considering he's the good guy. I guess there's an effective atmosphere where, since we're following the perspective of the criminals on the rooftop, he might just grab us too. Before the crooks face the wrath of the Dark Knight, they actually allude to him, referring to him as the Bat. And then speak of the devil after all that build-up. Batman jumps down on them, and the two criminals opt to keep some distance, and to be honest, I kinda didn't like the part where they shoot him and he's temporarily knocked down, and I don't know what purpose that served, but right afterwards, he gets right back up and goes to town on these criminals. He kicks the first one so hard that he flies through the door, smashing it open, and with the second, he demonstrates his batarang to rope tie the criminal and then drag him out to the edge of the building. The criminal is completely defeated and begs Batman not to kill him. That's where Batman asks him to do him a favor and, quote, tell all your friends about me. And that's where we have a deliberately awesome one-liner that's been quoted a million times ever since.
I'm Batman.
It's one of those quotes that have so many variations to it. You can say it in any way you like, and it doesn't get old. It can be gruff or slow, or harsh and quick. There's not a wrong way to say this line. So yeah, such a simple line. And this is in a scene that gets overshadowed by everything that happens after it. When people talk about this movie, it's for the stuff that happens later. Anyways, Batman spares the criminal and jumps down. And I love this little part from the criminal's perspective where he looks down after Batman jumps down and is super relieved to see him gone. Although it's this face that tells you that he's going to think twice before committing another crime. Yeah, so that's Batman's introduction. Very simple yet memorable. This is a comic book movie at its core, and they utilize the character to its greatest effect. Anyways, in the next scene, we get the Gotham City Council, or whatever it's called, led by Mayor Borg, who introduces a new district attorney, Harvey Dent. Dent in this movie is played by Dee Williams. Oh wow. Anyways, this speech concerns the crime spread throughout Gotham, and Dent announces that he, along with the authorities, intend to stamp it out, calling out one Carl Grissom. Carl Grissom is a character created exclusively for the film that's based on Carmine Falcone. This film does introduce a bunch of stuff that's unique to this universe, and this is one of them. So far, if you know nothing about this movie, he's easy to point the finger at for the role of the main villain. Although we get introduced to our actual main villain, Jack Napier, played by Jack Nicholson, who is watching Harvey Dent giving his speech on the television. We first have a foreshadowing on his alter ego when he fiddles around with a deck of cards. In his earliest stage, he's incredibly snarky, and this comes with his interactions towards Alicia Hunt, who he's boinking. While not an absolute lunatic now, he clearly is the villain based on how he conducts himself. He visually comes across as this high-ranked criminal, enjoying the finer things in life. I like the previous scene more, but obviously you need a setup for the main villain, who at this point is not you-know-who yet. In the next scene, we get some background on Batman. In the aftermath of Batman attacking those two crooks, they're both being arrested presumably, and we get introduced to two characters, Police Lieutenant Max Urquhart and reporter Alexander Knox. And this is where we get a lot more context on Batman. It's referenced that he's been cited 8 times in just under a month, although Max here refuses to answer any of his questions. Now, Knox, as far as I can tell, is a new addition to the Batman mythos. I might be wrong, but I get the impression that he didn't exist prior. Plus, I couldn't find him in any of my research. While I'm not the biggest contributor to this story, I like Knox, being an enthusiastic reporter, and brings a lot of light to an otherwise dark movie. There's nothing wrong with that sort of stuff in a dark film about vigilantes and crime and whatnot. When Max decides to walk away from the snooty reporter, we find out right afterwards that he's a dirty cop, as he's seen talking to Jack Napier, accompanied by who we will soon know as Bob the Goon. So Urquhart is in league with the big bad crime lord Carl Grissom. It's shown here that he commonly works for Jack, although reluctantly, as he doesn't like him, thinking of him as a psycho. He insults Jack to his face, and we get this moment where Jack angrily pushes Urquhart, and when Urquhart draws his gun, Bob's got Jack's back, returning a gun pointed to him in turn. The way this is edited, it's very slick and it's got that gangster vibe to it. Point is that Jack is a threat to be taken seriously. We get hints of his psychotic, sociopathic nature. In the next scene, we see that the 200th anniversary of Gotham is near, and the mayor ignores the dangers of crime and announces that he wants the event to be packed and nothing is going to cancel it. Harvey Dent in this scene responds that people are too scared to attend the celebration and they're out of money on top of that. Although Mayor Borg responds that the businesses will surge, and Carl Grissom will be caught soon. After that, we get the introduction of the biggest female character in this film. When Knox returns to the newspaper place he works for, he initially meets Vicky Vale, a character from the comics. Although, to be honest, I was unfamiliar with the character prior to this film. And according to Wikipedia, Vicky was typically presented as a love interest for Bruce Wayne, and had suspicions with him being Batman, which is exactly what we see in this film. She is played by Kim Basinger. And let's get one thing out of the way. Romance subplots are not my cup of tea, but it holds the story together when it's done well. And it is here. Basically, Knox takes a liking to Vicky, and as they talk, Vicky is interested in Knox's story about the Batman. Vicky's apparently got an invitation to Bruce Wayne's fundraiser party, which Commissioner Gordon will be attending. And seeing the opportunity to speak to him about Batman, Knox and Vicky team up to investigate Batman. Meanwhile, Carl Grissom discusses with his colleagues the fact that the authorities have figured out that the evidence that will land him in jail is stored at the Axis Chemicals facility, and they've got to get rid of it. During all this, we see both Jack Napier attend this meeting, as well as Carl's mistress Alicia coming up by the elevator. And it's the same woman who was seen muddling around with Jack. And so one can piece together that she and Jack were snuggling around behind Grissom's back. Grissom then opts to send Jack to get rid of the evidence, and we see an early sign of his dissent when we see that he's got that set of cards with him, one of them being a joker. Jack initially questions Grissom on the job, but Grissom insists that it must be done because he's his best man, and he trusts no one else with the job, and he specifically puts his cards into Jack's hat. And then as soon as he leaves, we see that he knows about the affair, remarking that Jack's luck is about to change, and he contacts Lieutenant Urquhart from earlier, clearly including something malicious for Jack. It's here where we cut to Bruce Wayne's party. We follow Knox as he asks Commissioner Gordon about Batman, in which he is dismissed. This is also our first scene of Bruce Wayne outside his alter ego. He is initially approached by Vicky, and he doesn't give away that he's Bruce Wayne in the flesh right away. And it's strange that she doesn't recognize him, given she was invited to Bruce's party after all, but that's probably a nitpick. We also see Alfred Pennyworth, Bruce's butler and father figure, and he's acting as you might expect him. being a butler. We see Commissioner Gordon being called away from the party after being told that Jack Napier's been spotted at Ace Chemicals, and Eckhart's dealing with it. It's implied that Gordon knows that Eckhart's a dirty cop in line with Grissom because he leaves right away. Knox witnesses him leaving abruptly, and he and Vicky try to look for the commissioner. And this is where the both of them properly meet Bruce Wayne. We see firsthand that Bruce is a polite guy, and he greets both of them openly, and has no issues even though they've gone out of bounds during the party. However, Alfred signals to him that Commissioner Gordon left for something seemingly urgent, and so Bruce has to leave. First impressions of Bruce Wayne are positive. He comes across as a polite, friendly guy, and has no negative traits concerning his immense wealth. He's got high social standing, but isn't some rich douchebag for the sake of it. I said previously that I thought I might have disagreed with the casting choice for Batman if I was around before the film's released, but I quite like the casting. Michael Keaton plays the role really well, switching between menacing vigilante and friendly billionaire. He works in each scene. He does come off as a guy who's worth billions, but also isn't some greedy dick at the top of his game. First impressions, we like Bruce. But as I said, Bruce gets called away, and we see the painting he walks past actually has a secret camera system to keep track of guests at the party and make sure they don't find the Batcave. Bruce looks through his advanced surveillance system and overhears Gordon being called over to Axis Chemicals. And so he makes it his mission to get over there as his alter ego Batman. Moving over to the Axis Chemicals sequence, we see Eckhart, who I forgot to mention this earlier, played Porkins in Star Wars A New Hope. So that's an interesting bit of trivia. But anyways, he organizes his police team to kill Jack. We see Jack meanwhile has his crew slice open a safe, but upon getting access to it, he realizes there's nothing, and Grissom set him into a trap. When the police come into contact with Jack, the whole police shootout has the vibe of a classic gangster film. The way the guns are fired and how the cops and criminals get into cover has a very classic feeling. It's very film noir, and if I had to guess, it's playing into the fact that Batman has been around since the late 1930s. Also the fact that Jack and his crew are also dressed that way, where they look like they come from a classic gangster film. A bunch of other 1980s action films were very different when it came to how their guns were fired on screen. So this seemed like a deliberate choice to do it in a very classic fashion. Commissioner Gordon shows up to the scene and overrides Eckhart's order to have Jack Napier killed, announcing that he wants him taken alive. Shortly after that, Batman shows up, and he starts by grappling one of Napier's henchmen and tying him over the balcony. Jack's perspective shows him evading police, and the music picks up immensely as he gets straight to the top and he overlooks the police searching for him. He almost seizes the opportunity to shoot Commissioner Gordon dead until he's stopped by Batman, who grabs him, although he's forced to put him down when Jack's sidekick Bob threatens to clip Gordon. Jack, when he's lowered, tries to pick up his gun to fire at Batman, but he's disappeared all of a sudden. Bob warns him that they should flee, but then he proceeds to aim his gun at Eckhart and shoots him dead with one bullet, getting Batman to return. Jack's attempt to quick shot the Dark Knight fails, as he's able to deflect it, although the bullet causes a chemical pipe to burst open and spray on Jack's face, and causes him to fall over the railing, although he catches onto a bar. Batman tries his hardest to save him, although his grip slips and Jack falls down into a giant vat of green acid, presumably killing him. Batman, realizing that his job's done, throws a smoke bomb and grapples up to escape. The scene closes with Batman on the rooftops and the bottom of the Ace Chemicals facility, showing a hand raising out, indicating that Jack did indeed survive, although as you might notice, his skin is now chalky white. So yeah, this was a pretty engaging action sequence. It was a bit weird that it was presented initially like a film noir gangster film, but it wasn't at the film's detriment. The score was pretty good, and the scene ends appropriately, with indications towards the fate and subsequent transformation of Jack Napier. So yeah, we cut to Knox asking the police on the phone about the events of last night, although they report that Jack Napier committed suicide. He also finds out that Vicky Vale's also already got a date with Bruce Wayne when he asks her out, So yeah, Vicky got invited for dinner by Bruce off screen. This is perhaps the proper start to the romance subplot. If I had to describe what happens here, you can piece together that Bruce Wayne's life is very reclusive. He makes an offhand remark when having dinner with Vicky that he doesn't even think he's been in the room they're eating in right now. We get perhaps our first taste of Alfred Pennyworth, in which we see him tell Vicky a story about Bruce's one and only writing lesson. After this, we get a conversation between Bruce and Vicky, in which Vicky says that Alfred reminds her of her grandfather. And when asked about his family, Bruce says that Alfred pretty much is his family. And you can piece together that he hasn't told the whole story. Although things get incredibly interesting when we cut to elsewhere in Gotham, to a secluded surgery room. We see a doctor treating someone who is presumably Jack. The scene is lighted in a very horror-esque way, and it's effective. Jack unmasks himself, and the doctor is disturbed at what he sees, which is saying a lot since a doctor like him should be more prepared to people with disfigurements. Next comes some disturbing laughter after the doctor tells him the nerves were completely severed. Jack immediately leaves the surgeon's room and walks out. Amidst all this, we cut to a scene of Bruce and Vicky snuggling around, which isn't that interesting, but the fact that it's in the same vicinity as Jack's disturbing laughter is what keeps my attention. To summarize this part, Bruce and Vicky sleep together, and that's all you need to know. There wasn't really a lot of significant depth beyond that. The real stuff happens when Jack enters Grissom's place, and at first Grissom thinks his mistress has entered, but it's actually Jack. You can visibly see that Grissom is nervous, seeing how his plan to get Jack killed has failed, and now it's gonna backfire in his face harder than anyone could imagine. They have Jack covered in darkness so he can barely see him, and then he announces to Grissom that he knows that he set him up, and after failing to reach for his gun, Grissom immediately begs for his life, although Jack ain't interested, and in fact, he's no longer Jack. He stands out into the light, revealing he now resembles a clown, as he now calls himself the Joker, and thus the start of the circus music. This song was also featured in the Lego Batman game, and they show the Joker going to town on Grissom, shooting him 6 times with great enjoyment before the ammo runs out. Grissom is visibly killed after 2 shots, and it seems now that Grissom's assets are now Joker's, and the sadistic Jack has turned into an even more sadistic Joker. You can tell that this is the result of an already psychotic criminal going insane. It's a deadly combination, and that's what's interesting about this version of the Joker compared to others. I've seen a lot of other Jokers started off as more normal people who lost their sanity due to bad circumstances. I even heard in one of the comics there was an instance of the Joker briefly regaining sanity, being overcome with immense guilt, and reverting back to insanity due to overwhelming pressure. This Joker, however, was always a terrible person. This movie, from what I've researched, makes up its own elements of the Batman lore to assist its own story. Freshening up the source material at the end of the day is fine if it's done well, and I'd say it is here. The Joker is not typically given a backstory, and he's usually just the agent of chaos that challenges Batman. Obviously in a symbolic dynamic, but still. So anyways, Joker's now claimed Grissom's criminal empire, and he sees the newspaper that Grissom had on his desk, where Batman is all over the front page. And the Joker is all too pleased to give Gotham himself. And yeah, you're probably not ready for the antics that come next. I certainly wasn't, despite that on-screen warning. We get a brief scene where Bruce and Vicky plan a future date, but believe me when I say the focus is still on the Joker. Grissom's mistress walks in, sees the lunatic that was once Jack Napier, and faints. Then we see the Joker gather all the other crime bosses for a meeting, acting like Grissom's gone into hiding, and proposing a plan to storm the Gotham City 200-year anniversary festival. And as you might expect, none of them take him seriously. The guy at the very back then asks the Joker what's with that stupid grin, and we see the Joker has painted his skin back to a normal color, although his grin is permanent. Jesus, is that grin disturbing. And the mob boss in the back is tricked into shaking hands with the Joker. And yeah, you probably saw it coming, since it's pretty much an iconic staple of the Joker. But he electrocutes and burns the crime boss to death through a handshake. And that's before he forces all the crime bosses out. The Joker in this movie does truly come across as a deranged lunatic. but I suppose he isn't without his humorous moments. However, that's only to the audience, and not the characters in-universe, as he truly is menacing. We see that he's already gathered up support for his cause, and his right-hand man Bob from earlier is still his top guy. I read somewhere that apparently it's an urban legend that Jack Nicholson would not play the Joker unless they created a second-in-command to his description. And that's how Bob exists in the first place, allegedly. The Joker even talks to the guy he just killed, remarking how he's glad he's dead. And yeah, the sight of the burning corpse is pretty screwed up. You know, for some reason, movies that aren't directly horror can largely manage to have the greatest horror scenes. Anyways, moving on, Vicky, presumably the next day, spots Bruce walking on the street and follows him to an empty, shady-looking area where he places 2 flowers on a random spot before walking away, which of course is the setup for the eventual flashback. Bruce is around to witness the Joker, who he immediately recognizes as Jack Napier, interrupt the City Hall report when one of the crime bosses who was forced out of Grissom's old place is killed by the Joker, when he, no joke, and I'm not trying to be funny here, throws a pen at the guy's neck, and proudly announces that the pen is indeed mightier than the sword. All the while his goons fire their machine guns, and they drive off. However, this isn't enough to draw attention to the Joker, as everyone immediately after ties this assassination to Batman, suspecting him on being a mob enforcer in an upcoming gang war. The Joker is, of course, furious that nobody has properly noticed him yet, and now he's going to amp up the sadism to 11. Vicky, meanwhile, after seeing Bruce put flowers down at a random spot, is curious to why he did so, and starts digging into things. But hey, the Joker steals the show, as while he's in the middle of cutting pictures out, his sidekick Bob shows him a picture of Vicky Vale, and the Joker immediately jumps to how he's got to have her to himself. And you know how I mentioned that the Joker planned to amp up the sadism to draw the eyes away from Batman? Yeah, well, he wasn't kidding. In one of the most effective scenes in the film, we get the perspective of a news station, in which we see the 2 reporters in question talk about the deaths of 2 models. And looking at the picture they have on screen, in which the 2 women have the same disturbing grin as the Joker, you know this isn't going to end well. As they're discussing recent deaths, the female reporter starts uncontrollably laughing at the most inappropriate time, until she inevitably collapses to the floor, and they're forced to call paramedics and cut the signal. But we see immediately afterwards that the Joker seizes the opportunity, because he reenacts the Max Headroom incident by sadistically announcing the distribution of brand new Joker products, which he named Smilex. He showcases the 2 models killed earlier in the most fucked up commercial I've ever seen. We even get a glimpse of the reporter who has succumbed to Smilex, and yeah, the first time I saw that sent chills down my spine. Meanwhile, we see Jack Nicholson have such dumb fun with the role, as he expressively promotes his death product. There's even this part where we see that he kidnaps some unfortunate guy, letting us know right away that he's not an actor, and showing another dead guy who succumbed to Smilex. The Joker gleefully announces through the broadcast interruption that it's more than likely that the everyday products people have bought have Smilex in them. And yeah, that was definitely effective. You thought catching COVID was bad? Now there's a scare over everyday products potentially resulting in your death. But the Joker thinks it's fine, because at least you'll die with a smile. We even see Bruce Wayne watch this screwed up commercial on TV. And yeah, let me freeze frame the shot. That says all you need to know.
What the hell am I looking at? When does this happen in the movie?
On a separate news station, we learned that at least 13 people have died related to Smilex, and everyone else in the city are in a crazed panic over the Joker products. We even see that the mayor and Harvey Dent are incapable of dealing with the crisis, which shows us how much of a threat the Joker is. He went from unknown to taking the eyes of the press away from Batman, and now everyone is talking about him now, just like he wanted. We see Bruce is supposed to see Vicky at the Gotham Museum, but as you might expect, since the Joker wants Vicky too, he's not that far behind. As soon as Vicky goes to the museum and sits on a table, she gets a small package with a gas mask. and a note instructing her to put it on immediately, as the vents spew out toxic gas that kills everyone but Vicky, as she's the lucky one who was provided the mask. The Joker a mere minute later busts through the door with his henchmen. He tells the tall one, Lawrence, who has a boombox in hand, to turn on the music, and yeah, we get one of the most ridiculous, yet perfectly paced music scenes I've ever seen. Although we're only halfway through the movie runtime-wise, this could almost rival something like Shrek 2's climax, and that's where the Joker and his goons go to town on the museum, pretty much vandalizing everything. And they play a song by Prince made specifically for this movie. Prince actually made 9 of them. One of them was called Bat Dance, and the one they play in this scene is called Party Man. I don't know if this confirms that Prince exists in this universe. I guess we saw that Neil deGrasse Tyson unironically exists in the DCEU, since he made a cameo as himself in Batman v Superman. So anything's possible. I almost like to think that Prince in this universe was literally hired by the Joker to make this song, so he and his goons could have fun vandalizing the museum. I've said this in a community post, but I really enjoy universes that work in parallel with our own for some reason. It makes it so interesting to see how things play out in a fictional universe that has some real events. Anyways, a notable difference between this Joker and the others is how it seems like the Joker in this universe is a genuinely good boss. The Joker traditionally scares criminals into working for him, usually before killing them anyways. But this Joker seems to be fun for his goons to work under. We see this, as you can see his henchmen, all of them enthusiastically and gleefully throwing the paint everywhere on the museum. Like this guy who paints a head statue to resemble the Joker, and you can see how much he's enjoying it. And this other guy who vandalizes this painting by hand painting. You know this guy's brilliant when you know that he doesn't have to rely on fear for people to work for him. And that's almost a great asset. Strike fear into your enemies, but give your allies a fun time. Take some notes, North Korea. Anyways, they dance up their way to Vicky before they finally stop the music so that the Joker and she can talk. As you might expect, the Joker is incredibly creepy in this scene and doesn't take anything seriously. He of course compliments Vicky as an artist and tries to corner her, initially showing off his acid flower spitter on his shirt, and when Vicky spills some water on him, he mockingly yells out that he's melting. Despite how uncomfortable this all is, Batman then thankfully shows up right after, grabs Vicky, and uses his grapple gun to exit the front of the museum. This is the first time Batman in the suit and the transformed Joker see each other, and the Joker actually has a lot of respect for Batman. Not in any redeemable way in-universe, but it's something. Batman and Vicky get into the Batmobile and race across Gotham as Joker, and his goons chase them. The action chase sequence, on top of being well composed by Danny Elfman, is also pretty entertaining to watch. It's very slick how Batman escapes the Joker's goons, if that's the right word. Batman is ultra prepared and seems to have mapped out the city perfectly. However, he and Vicky are eventually cornered by some of the Joker's goons, in which Batman lifts Vicky up to the top of a balcony while he beats the crap out of the Joker's goons. They do manage to gun him down for a while, but they make the mistake of trying to take off his mask, in which he gets right back up and goes to town on these criminals. There's even one that swings around like a ninja, and I couldn't help but think that this is how they'd visualize it in a comic book movie. I'd argue that the original Spider-Man was better formatted as a live-action comic book film, but Batman still looks like a comic book brought to life in design. The choreography isn't that impressive, as you could say Michael Keaton didn't train extra hard in the gym for the role, but the way they get around it still makes the fight scenes believable. The only goon who manages to get away is Bob, and that's because he runs away. Can't blame him though, he knows he's no match for Batman. On top of being introduced to the Batmobile in this very sequence, we also immediately get the Batcave, as that's where Batman takes Vicky. He didn't bring her to the Batcave for no reason, however. As it turns out, he's figured out how to avoid Smilex, and he gives Vicky a document full of information on it, and tells her to give it to the press, all before knocking her out, in which she wakes up in her room, realizing that her camera is gone, since Batman obviously didn't want photos taken of him, but she in return has got the documents. It's soon after reported on Gotham's news stations that Batman has cracked the Joker's code, and to avoid X ingredients. However, you can see that public opinion is not fully on Batman's side yet, as the news reporter still gives the possibility that Batman could be either friend or foe. Now, this movie is sort of an origin story if you think about it. While the starting point of Bruce becoming Batman happens in a flashback a bit later on, the movie starts with Batman in his early days as a crime-fighting vigilante. This is at the start of his career as the Caped Crusader, and he's still seen how any vigilante is seen. Still, we can see that Batman's reputation has become a lot better now, even if people aren't sure whether or not to call him a friend or foe to Gotham City. And I kinda like that reluctance. It's similar to Spider-Man, where he needed to keep working in order to sway the city of New York onto his side, which we eventually see in Spider-Man 3. I also presume the comics probably went something like that too, since J. Jonah Jameson always puts Spider-Man down as hard as he can. But as we all know, Batman is not a very friendly superhero. He relies on intimidation and fear to cease criminal activity, while Spider-Man relies on being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Anyways, we see the Joker is pretty pissed meanwhile, and now he's gonna take another shot at Vicky Vale. That's where we see Bruce and Alfred in the Batcave, in which Alfred suggests that Bruce should probably confess to Vicky that he's Batman. Although the meeting with Vicky isn't easy, because Vicky is pissed at Bruce for lying about going out of town earlier in the movie, and Bruce tries to get her to sit down and listen to him, insisting that he has a very important reason he lied. But he can't get himself to say that he's Batman so easily. He tries to build up to it by explaining that he leads a double life, and Vicky at first assumes that he's trying to say that he's already married, but Bruce of course denies that. He still doesn't get to the point, and that's where a ring comes at the doorbell, and as you might expect, it's the Joker. He expresses annoyance that Vicky ran off with Batman, quote, without an apology. He then heavily implies that he killed Grissom's mistress, but says that she committed suicide recently. Bruce looks for a means of defense, all before he goes to confront the Joker. The Joker recognizes him immediately as Bruce Wayne, and Bruce in turn tells him that he knows he's Jack Napier. This scene really goes back and forth between the two. It's like Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson have a chemistry, if that's the right word. And it's a shame the movie only has so much time. But this is actually one of the highlights of the movie for me, especially since the Joker says something that Bruce doesn't expect. He says, quote, "You ever dance with the devil by the pale moonlight?" And Bruce is a bit startled with hearing that. But that's before the Joker guns him down, although it's revealed later that he used a metal tray to protect himself. Joker then leaves, and later, Knox provides Vicky with the information on why Bruce was in that alley. He brings out an old newspaper clipping from 20 or so years ago. I don't know. I couldn't find a date on it, in which it says that Bruce's parents were murdered in that same alley. We do see, meanwhile, that Bruce in the Batcave has gotten caught up with the memory of his parents' murder, as he asks Alfred, pretty much the only other person besides himself who knows the secret, to get him a file on his parents' murders. Meanwhile, the mayor decides to announce that the Gotham City 200-year anniversary festival will be cancelled, until the Joker again hijacks the broadcast, and announces to everyone in the city that he's giving away $20 million to the people at the festival at midnight, and anyone who shows up will be able to collect the money he's just throwing away for free. He proclaims that he's no killer, and that the real menace is Batman, and asks Batman through the broadcast if he's willing to take off the mask. Bruce in the Batcave pauses the broadcast, looking at the image of the Joker, and thinks to himself, and you can see that he now has a sudden realization. We get an ominous flashback to the night his parents were murdered. Thomas and Martha Wayne, along with their son Bruce, are now coming out from a theater after seeing a movie, and they walk into the wrong alleyway, in which two men show up to rob them. The music picks up as the shadows overcome the family of three. We see a man proceed to grab the necklace off of Martha Wayne, and the second man immediately shoots both Thomas and Martha dead, before telling Bruce, in a very deliberate way, "You ever dance with the devil by the pale moonlight?" and the second man walks into the light, and you can clearly tell it's a younger Jack Napier. Now, as many comic book nerds will know, this is a big change to the source material. I didn't mention the name of Jack's partner in this scene, but it's been confirmed that his name was Joe Chill. Now, Joe Chill is traditionally the confirmed killer of both Thomas and Martha Wayne, and ultimately the main reason Bruce Wayne became Batman. However, as you saw in this scene, Joe did not kill Bruce's parents. They do acknowledge the source material in this scene, of course, with having Joe Chill be present at the murder. However, he is not the killer. Watching this scene numerous times, there's actually a lot of detail in it. You can see, for one, that Joe Chill had no intention of having them killed. He clearly just intended to rob them. However, it was Jack Napier's immediate decision to shoot both of Bruce's parents dead that changed everything. In this one shot, you can see how surprised Joe is, that this clearly wasn't part of the plan. Jack Napier is also super ready to shoot Bruce Wayne dead too, and it's only because of Joe calling out to Jack to run that we see that Jack snaps out of his immediate bloodlust and spares Bruce. So if you think about it, despite Joe being an accomplice to the murder, he clearly did not intend for things to go down like that. He also is arguably indirectly Bruce's savior, as he snapped Jack out of his bloodlust in the moment that got Jack to spare Bruce. Otherwise he would have been killed too, since he had no intention of sparing him. It's still worth saying that Joe was complicit in the crime, however his intentions were far less severe, until Jack took things too far. We don't learn what happened to Joe Chill after this point, as he never appears in the series again, or at least in the Schumacher version of what happened after Batman Returns. I haven't read the alternate continuation comics yet, maybe he appears there. I don't know. Anyways, upon his sudden realization, we see that Alfred let Vicky Vale into the Batcave, because I guess if Bruce wasn't going to spill the beans, Alfred would. Yeah, so a startled Vicky gets to find out about Bruce's secret, and she and Bruce have a brief conversation about it. Bruce explains that he has this feeling, that it's something that he has to do. And keep in mind, this is right after we learn that Jack Napier killed his parents, which we all know is what motivated him to become Batman in the first place. After this point, Bruce springs into action against the Joker. He drives straight into Axis Chemicals to destroy the Smilex materials. One question I have is how Batman knows this is where the chemicals are being made, and why the hell this wasn't dealt with earlier, during, you know, the original panic around the substance. So that leaves an unexplained plot hole. On the other hand, this is incredibly slick and cool, where Batman drives straight through the gate to the facility, drops a bomb, before proceeding to drive out as the facility explodes. You might have noticed because of that Michael Keaton's Batman is not above killing criminals. Now, the Batman in the early source material was just like that as well, and the no killing rule was added later as a gimmick to the character. I never personally thought Batman killing criminals took away from the character, because in a scene like this, it's just badass of him to just drive in, drop a bomb, and drive out without batting an eye. Batman in this adaptation obviously holds no regards for the lives of criminals, especially for those who go too far, like working for the lunatic that is the Joker. That's what a vigilante is, someone who takes the law into their own hands. Batman is a hero of fear, and he shows no mercy, at least in this version. Anyways, the Joker witnesses all of this in a helicopter, and then it awkwardly cuts to the festival. Pretty awkward, not going to lie, and it feels like there's a scene missing. Honestly, it might have made more sense if Batman just destroyed the facility, but the Joker isn't there. And then he gets in his Batwing to go straight to the festival to finish the Joker off and whatnot. Anyways, the Joker along with Bob and the rest of his goons go across the middle of the street, attracting bystanders towards them, given his offer of free money in the range of 20 million. During this scene, another Prince song plays, this one being called Trust, which of course is a super ironic name for a song in the case of this scene. Joker and his goons pass through the street and opt to give their fat stacks of cash and just throw it away as the greedy hordes of Gotham citizens reach for the free money. Knox and Vicky show up to take pictures during the whole ordeal, and in the meanwhile, Batman, along with his trusty Batwing, shows up to fly around. Joker then, of course, after throwing out all the money, then reveals his sadistic intent Intentions, where he reveals that the balloon is full of toxic Smilex gas, ordering all of his goons to put on their protective masks before he himself does so, and proceeds to gas the stupid, greedy citizens who really wanted the money. And here's an extra fact for you. According to the novelization of the film, the money was completely fake, so anyone who managed to run out of range with whatever they collected probably found out the hard way later that all they escaped with was worthless. Yeah, so all they had to be happy with is that they got out alive. I guess on the Joker's end, the fake money was yet another joke. So yeah, while the Smilex gas is out, Vicky locks herself in the car she just arrived in, and Knox puts on his own mask and proceeds to try and fend off the Joker's goons with a baseball bat. All before Batman comes in grappling all of the Joker's balloons and launching them up into the Earth's atmosphere where they can do no damage. Then you probably know that I dislike what comes next, where a furious Joker proceeds to ask Bob for his gun, to which he proceeds to shoot Bob. The villain kills his own man cliche, and the fact on top of it that he does it for literally no reason. I was actually kind of enjoying the detail that the Joker seemed like a great boss for his henchmen, and that's how he kept them loyal, despite the fact that he was clearly insane. I don't know. I've said commonly that trope always takes me out of a story if it isn't done well, and it's reasons like this that it doesn't. I would have preferred if Bob was the last line of defense for Batman to get to the Joker later on, and apparently that was actually the plan. But the producer John Peters was dissatisfied with the fight scene, so I guess they just decided to get rid of him and replace him with a stunt actor at the end, but we'll get to that. It also seemed like an out-of-character moment for the Joker, since he considered Bob his top guy, and the history they shared together. I was dissatisfied with how they ended Bob the Goon in this movie. Based on how he was set up, it would have been preferable if they went with the original plan, because he seemed like the type of character with undying loyalty to Jack Napier turned the Joker, and stuck by him no matter how much of a lunatic he became. Plus the fact that the Smilex balloons being taken wasn't his fault, and you'd expect Bob to get a more interesting demise, because as I hear, he ended up being more popular than you expected after the film was released. Also researching the sidekick to the Joker, he's played by Tracy Walter, who is a personal friend of Jack Nicholson and recommended him for the role, but that's not it. You know who he's also friends with? Danny DeVito, who played the main villain in the literal sequel Batman Returns. I learned this when looking up the character and his actor on the Batman wiki, but learning all that, it convinced me that Bob deserved a different fate, going out fighting Batman. Or in some hypothetical alternate universe he survives, and then works for the Penguin in the sequel, since I mentioned before that the respective actors are also friends in real life, and it can be some sort of symbolism, but that's me spitballing. Point is, I prefer the original plan to have him actually fight Batman. Now, since the Joker killed his right-hand man, you know that he's gonna follow suit at some point. You know that thing where a supporting villain dies in a certain way, the main villain follows? So Batman goes in with his Batwing to fire straight at the Joker next. And the Joker, in return, pulls out this ridiculously sized pistol out of his pants, and with one shot, downs the Batwing near the cathedral. Now Vicky, who is in the area, gets concerned, and runs over to the Batwing to make sure Bruce as Batman is okay. Although this results in her being held at gunpoint by the Joker, who then radios for a helicopter to meet them both at the top of the cathedral. Batman soon after gets out of the Batwing, having survived, and follows the pair up the stairs. Danny Elfman's score provides another track that I originally heard in Lego Batman at the end of the Joker storyline. The music is very grandiose, and is almost like a dramatic orchestra you'd hear in an actual church. Like if, say, Catholicism was a movie, this would be the perfect music for the climax, where the papacy goes extinct or something. Batman doesn't slow one bit to make it to the top, even after the Joker destroys a bell at the top, which blocks the entrance to the place, because this is when the police arrive, so Batman's gotta do everything alone. Yeah, it's a common trope, but it's effective at showing that it's all up to Batman to stop this lunatic once and for all. As I indicated earlier, Batman faces a bunch of the Joker's goons who attack him, while the Joker himself forces Vicky to dance with them. Well, actually, you can see that only the Joker is dancing, and he's basically moving Vicky around since she isn't. That is until Batman's taken out all of the goons, and Vicky spots Batman from a short distance, and decides to take the dancing more seriously to distract the Joker. The distraction is effective enough where we perhaps get the only joke coming from Batman directly. He asks Joker the question he asked him as a boy right after killing his parents, and punches him hard, where the Joker stumbles back and bumps into a bell. Batman then goes to town on the Joker, although the punches aren't as brutal feeling as they could be. I remember the climax of the first Spider-Man movie, and yeah, that's what you call brutal. However, here, the punches sound and feel like low-damage pinchy punches almost. It's not the same as 60s Batman where every punch spews out a comic book punch word, but it's still a bit underwhelming. What's gripping here is the dialogue during this fight. Joker reminds Batman that he made him the Joker, getting him covered in that vat of chemicals earlier in the movie. And after a couple more punches, Batman counters by reminding him that he killed his parents, so he made him Batman first. And the Joker then responds with one of his most iconic gags. He no-joke puts on a pair of glasses and rhetorically asks Batman that he wouldn't hit a guy with glasses, would he? And of course Batman punches him off the balcony, intending to get him to fall to his death, although the Joker still maintains his grip, and pulls Vicky and Batman down when they get too close. Now Joker's got the high ground. This is the height of the climax, and the Joker is laughing harder than he has before. Like, he offers to lend Vicky a hand, but he meant that literally, and Vicky loses her grip, only to be caught by Batman, although the Joker decides to try and stomp both of them off. All the while the helicopter he called in approaches to pick him up, although Batman too has got a trick up his sleeve. He grapples the Joker's leg to a gargoyle statue. So as the Joker grips the ladder provided to him, the statue snaps off the cathedral with him, and the weight causes the Joker to actively struggle. And yeah, you can tell the Joker's had his last laugh, as he struggles to hold on, and eventually the weight of the statue becomes too much, and he dramatically falls to his death. Batman and Vicky afterwards nearly fall to their deaths too, but luckily Batman had a grappling hook, so he saves both himself and Vicky, and they're both safe. We get a final scene before the wrap-up stage of the movie, where the police surround the now-deceased Joker, who of course went out with the biggest smile ever. However, despite his demise, he is now a larger-than-life villain, as he is the posthumous antagonist of all the sequels that followed. And I've noticed that in a lot of the great Batman stories, whenever it's time for the Joker to finally die, his death has consequences in some way. In Justice, for example, after the Joker tricks Superman into killing Lois Lane and causing the nuclear detonation of Metropolis, Superman understandably loses control and flat out impales the Joker with his fist and arm, then becomes broken, and inspires all the terrible events that happen afterwards, where Superman becomes the de facto dictator of planet Earth, and harshly enforces his policies on everyone, becoming a supervillain in the process. I also believe there's also long-lasting consequences in The Dark Knight too, but I'm gonna be 100% honest. Batman 89 is actually the first Batman movie I finished. I was always more of a Spider-Man kind of guy, but this observation that I have makes me realize that a lot of the Batman stories, when they're done well, have some sort of lasting impact. So in the wrap-up stage of the movie, they announce at City Hall that all of the Joker's goons have been rounded up and arrested. Knox and Vicky attend this hearing, and it's shown that Gotham City and the law are completely on Batman's side, as Batman has openly stated to the police that should something like this arise again, the police can raise the iconic bat signal whenever he's needed. Despite his failed attempts to pursue Vicky, Knox does get a kiss on the cheek at the end, which is better than nothing, as Vicky walks away, approaching Alfred, who both get into a car, and they close the story with Alfred informing Vicky that Bruce might be a little late, and Vicky completely understands what that means. The final shot of the movie is the camera panning up to Batman standing high in the sky tops with the bat signal overhead. He is now Gotham City's official protector, and that's Batman 89. So yeah, this is a superb movie. In fact, this is so superb that there was a reason why so many distributors for high-profile movies that released in 1989 were scared of this film as it was coming out. And to give some context, 1989 when it comes to film was huge. We got Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Back to the Future Part 2, and Ghostbusters 2. While Indiana Jones ultimately beat out Batman by around $60,000 in the box office, Batman was an understandable threat to literally every other movie. And the thing is, all three of the movies I just mentioned were sequels to stories people were already comfortable with. And while Batman had decades of notoriety before then, this was a new Batman universe. And I mentioned the Michael Keaton skeptics that existed before the film released. I love all three movies I just mentioned on top of Batman. And if you're interested, I actually have a review on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and the rest of the series if you're interested in watching it. So overall, Batman is a very influential superhero movie, and expectations were blown away, especially after it turned out that Michael Keaton could do a serious role like Batman very well. Jack Nicholson as the Joker was also very iconic. His only rival would arguably be the late Heath Ledger, who we all know played his own version of the villain in The Dark Knight. Heath Ledger took massive inspiration from Nicholson, so one could argue that there would be no Heath Ledger Joker without Nicholson's, as Nicholson provided a baseline for how the Joker should be portrayed in a blockbuster movie. Nicholson has also stated that the Joker was one of his favorite roles ever. He's retired now, but I'm almost imagining that if they made a Batman No Way Home with all the notable live-action Batman actors, minus Adam West because he's no longer with us, they'd try extra hard to get Nicholson out of retirement to reprise his role as the Joker, especially since Heath Ledger is gone. Speaking of which, it's quite odd that they didn't follow Marvel's example that made them a fuck ton of money and made a Batman No Way Home film with Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, and maybe Robert Pattinson, as well as having a bunch of the villains reprise their roles. It's probably a good thing that this doesn't seem to be happening, but the thing is, we all saw Spider-Man No Way Home for a reason. Okay, so with that being said, I give Batman a 9 out of 10. Problems I had were rather minor, with some inconsequential plot holes and bits that took me out of the story, but the film is really good. To be honest, I haven't actually progressed much through this particular film series. I'm actually yet to watch Batman Returns properly, and I have no idea what to think of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. I saw Batman and Robin on television once and didn't think anything of it, but now I have the chance to rewatch it, and I'm scared, since it's literally on Wikipedia's list of worst films ever. However, I'm going to read the Batman 89 comics first, which is the alternate version of what happened after Batman Returns. With that being said, that's Batman 89. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain, were you praying at the